All right, students, I'm really excited about this next lesson in writing that we're going to be doing. Remember that we are reading and writing to create our informative articles about bullying. And today we're going to start working on our body paragraphs. These body paragraphs are where we're going to show evidence that bullying is a serious problem and that we need to work on preventing it. So you're going to use graph interpretation to come up with your own spin on what you want to share in your informative article. Today, we're really going to focus on graph interpretation, and I'll show you how to change those observations and ideas into sentences to create a paragraph. Let's get started. This is graph interpretation, how to read different types of graphs and analyze them. There are several types of charts and graphs. The three most common are line graphs, bar graphs, and pie charts. A simple bar graph looks like this. At the bottom, we'll see different categories, and usually up across the left side, we'll see a numbered scale that shows something that we have measured. The title tells us what we're looking at, and we can get information from this. For example, I can tell that 6 people had romance as their favorite type of movie, and only 1 person liked drama the best. Next, we can look at a simple pie chart. This shows the same information, people's favorite types of movies, but it's represented in a different way. In this case, the circle is one whole, and all of the sectors or little portions here, they're called sectors, represent percents. So 20% of people liked comedy. That's 20% meant for people. Notice that we have the same quantity here, but it's represented in a different way there. Here we see drama as 1% or 5%. So we can notice how many people liked each type of movie. The total is out of 20 people, and it's represented by percents. So we see the actual number of people and the percent of people. Here it's harder for us to see the total number of people, but we're able to see how many people like each genre of movie. This is just one idea about how you can read a simple bar graph and a simple pie chart. Let's look at a simple line graph. This line graph is going to be the graph that we interpret as an example. Across the top, once again, we'll see a title. It's always important to have a title for the graph because data doesn't really mean anything if the numbers aren't attached to some idea in reality. Along the upper left side, just like in a line graph, we are going to see a numbered scale that shows what we're measuring. We're measuring the number of times people were eating fast food in every year. So if we see the line going over here for this red line, we're going to see that people ate that 100 times a year. Okay, and this is by Australian teenagers. Across the bottom, we have our categories. In this case, because it's a line graph, a lot of times the categories are based on a time period. And so we see the key dates like 1975, 1980, 1985, and then the line is smoothed so that we can see a trend. Were they eating more? Were they eating less of these different things? So we can see that, for example, in 1975, people were eating a ton of fish and chips, and that has decreased and been replaced with more pizza and hamburgers over time. Let's back up and talk about the 3 things you need to do when you're introducing data in your informative article. First, we need to introduce the graph. To do this, we're going to paraphrase the title of the graph, making sure we include a time frame if there is one. Remember, paraphrase means to tell the same information in your own words. I'm going to give you examples of each of these, but let me just go back. Here, when we say favorite type of movie, I could paraphrase that by saying the people's favorite genre of movies, right? Because we know that genre means a type. After we introduce a graph and help people understand what type of data we're going to be talking about, the second thing we need to do is to give an overview. We're not going to give details like specific numbers, but we want to talk about what's happening overall, right? So overall, we can talk about the fact that most genres had a lot of support, with one genre having very little interest. That would be an example of how we could do that, to talk about the overview without mentioning specific numbers. Then the third thing we need to do is to give the detail group data. And we need to show where there are patterns. Just like in word study, we're always trying to group the things that are similar and point out differences. We are using our cognitive skills to sort information and make meaning. To do this, we need to identify similarities and differences. At this point, we're going to write 4 to 6 sentences. Let me show you how to do this step by step. We are going to do this focusing on the simple line graph we already talked about, the consumption of fast food by Australian teenagers. We want to know what types of fast food and how much these teenagers are eating. All right, made it a little bit bigger so you can see there. The line graph released by the Australian Department of Health compares the fast food consumption in teenagers in Australia between 1975 to 2000. That was a way of paraphrasing and introducing the graph. We told the source of where the graph came from, we told the subject of the graph, what it's about, and we focused on the time period. When are we actually talking about, to put these facts in context? Now it was time to give an overview. Overall, the consumption of fish and chips declined over the period, whereas the amount of pizza and hamburgers that were eaten increased. Remember, we talked about the keywords increase and decrease in our past lesson. We've used keywords like overall and whereas to give the reader hints about what type of information we're going to give. When we say overall, we're going to talk about a main idea. When we say whereas, we're going to make a comparison that gives a distinction. We're going to show a contrast. That's our first 2 sentences down. Let's keep going. Now we're going to go into the details. We're going to look at the graphs and point out the details that are similar and the details that are different. So let's get started with those detail sentences. In 1975, the most popular food with Australian teenagers was fish and chips. However, the consumption of fish and chips gradually declined over to finish at just under 40 times in 2000. Okay, notice how here we've talked about the specific number. We talked about one specific date in our first sentence, and in our second sentence, we talked about how many times a year they were eating fish and chips, right? If you wanted to go the extra mile, you could also say that the amount of fish and chips people were eating in 2000 was 40% that of the amount of fish and chips they were eating in the year 1975. We know that because we've just studied percents. Let's look for some more details. In sharp contrast to this, teenagers ate the other 2 fast foods many more times in the year 2000. At the end of 2000, hamburgers were the most popular food. It was eaten 100 times per year. Pizza was even eaten over 80 times and finished at second place. Notice how we're comparing all the foods at the end at 2000 in these 3 sentences. The sharp rise in pizza and hamburger consumption could be because chains like Domino's, Pizza Hut, McDonald's, and Burger King have become more popular in recent times. In this section of giving details, we want to wonder why the numbers are the way they are. At the end of the day, we don't necessarily care about the actual number, the data per se. We want to know what that data means. Why do we think people are eating more of a certain type of fast food than the other? Why are some numbers different? Why do they change? This gets at the actual knowledge we're trying to find. These were 6 sentences diving into the details after we gave an introduction and an overview of the data. In this way, we can take one piece of data and really find understanding of what it tells us about our subject. These are some useful words and phrases. I'd love for you to pause right now and copy down some of these phrases that you intend to use in your article. You might want to have some for overview. Remember, that's your first sentence when you start talking about data. To compare and contrast similar data. Similarly, also to, as well, at the same time. For contrasting data. For probability and possibility. Remember, we don't always know exactly why something is the case, so we can use words that show what we think. This could be because, this might be because, this may be because. A possible reason for this is. And we have some words for concluding. In conclusion, summary, to sum up. Now we will analyze a couple of graphs in the context of bullying. Join me for the next video on this subject to dive into our subject, bullying, so that we can use the skill we just learned, analyzing data, to help us write our articles. Thanks so much. That was your first lesson on graph interpretation.